The United States has delayed the test launch of an unarmed intercontinental ballistic missile in an effort to avoid escalating the tensions created when President Vladimir Putin of Russia put his nuclear weapon forces on heightened alert on Sunday, several days after Russia invaded Ukraine, a Pentagon spokesman said on Wednesday afternoon. The spokesman, John Kirby, said at a news conference that Mr. Putin's provocative rhetoric and hostile changes to nuclear posture involving the most consequential weapons in our respective arsenals is unacceptable. The Secretary of Defense, Lloyd J. Austin III, decided to postpone the test launch of a Minuteman III intercontinental ballistic missile that had been previously scheduled for this week, Mr. Kirby said. The delay is intended to show we have no intention in engaging in any actions that could be misunderstood or misconstrued, Mr. Kirby said. We did not take this decision lightly, but instead to demonstrate that we are a responsible nuclear power, he added. Many Ukrainians have sought refuge from Russia's invasion in Lviv, a picturesque city in western Ukraine that has so far been spared heavy combat but not the anxiety and dread permeating the rest of the country. Located about 45 miles east of Ukraine's border with Poland, Lviv has become a hub for many of the hundreds of thousands of people trying to flee the war. Known for its ornately handsome buildings, rich culture and old European atmosphere, Lviv has now seen residents, including baristas and snowboarders, teachers and janitors, mobilize in resistance to Russia's aggression. At the same time, some aspects of daily life continue. Ash Wednesday services were performed at the imposing 14th-century Cathedral Basilica of the Assumption in the city's Old Town. And some residents are still out in the street. In the city's downtown, cafe windows have been taped over to prevent any shattering glass from explosions that could injure passers-by. Reports of civilian casualties rise in Ukraine, but exact counts remain uncertain. As the bombing of civilian targets in Ukraine intensified on Wednesday, reports of civilian casualties escalated. It was not immediately possible for the New York Times to provide an independent estimate and, as is often the case in war zones, reports diverged. The United Nations said that 227 civilians had been killed and 525 injured between February 24, when the invasion began, and March 1, but has noted that its numbers are likely undercounts. Shelling from heavy artillery, multi-launch rocket systems and airstrikes were responsible for most of the casualties, according to the UN Human Rights Office, which is leading the UN's count. Casualty counts in times of war can be skewed by many factors, including partisan propaganda, the fluidity and unpredictability of attacks and security threats to those officially tasked with assessing tolls. It is particularly difficult in the context of Ukraine, with misinformation circulating, Ravina Shamdasani, a spokeswoman for the UN Human Rights Office, said in an email. Over the past week, they have definitely been underestimates. Ms. Shamdasani said that the only reason her agency was able to provide figures at all was that it had been documenting civilian casualties since Russia's annexation of Crimea in 2014. The UN Human Rights Office's tally represents the casualties it has been able to independently verify, assess as credible, and cross-check with multiple sources by such means as interviewing witnesses, the injured and relatives of the dead, and consulting local authorities, law enforcement officials and the military. The agency also uses court records, data from hospitals, photos and videos, and information from international and local non-governmental organizations to corroborate its tally. Corroboration takes time, said Ms. Shamdasani. She also noted that it could be difficult to distinguish military from civilian casualties. Where we are unsure, we don't count them as civilians, she said. That's another reason for our lower civilian casualty numbers. A United Nations official who was not authorized to speak on the record said that the figures provided by the Ukrainian government were in line with what would be expected given the intensity and duration of the fighting. The Ukrainian government initially put the number of civilian deaths at more than 2,000, but Ukraine's Emergency Services Agency later called that figure approximate and said it is unknown how many people are actually still under fire and debris. There is no exact figure. On Wednesday, Lyudmila Denisova, Ukraine's human rights ombudsman, said in a Facebook post that 21 children had been killed and 55 injured since the invasion. She said that figure had been calculated through the analysis of information from various sources, but it was not immediately possible to reach her for further information on her sources.